Joe would like to know, gold has underperformed against inflation for the last 2 years. The argument is that investment banks JP Morgan are rigging prices, inflating supply with derivatives like GLD. What makes you believe that gold can be an inflation hedge and that its price will grow despite recent lagging?
Well, that's what history tells us, doesn't it? I mean, you're dealing with 5,000 years. Of course, we've seen the Bitcoin crisis, or the cryptocurrency crisis, I should be more accurate, develop. And I make no opposition on that because I'm not an expert in these matters when it comes to crypto. But if you're talking about preservation of wealth for 5,000 years, how it's performed in the last 2 years is staggeringly irrelevant. Yes, you're quite right. The price is manipulated at the moment, but it's largely manipulated by the big players like JP Morgan so they can acquire in specie bullion and wait for the great recalibration and they'll make money. The big boys always make money. JP Morgan always makes money out of it. And it doesn't matter how many rules they break. They get fined billions of dollars every year. They get fined billions of dollars. That's small change. That's about like the average punter getting a speeding fine or a parking fine. They don't care. But those days will come. Suppressed for 2 years, I shouldn't worry about it. We're in for the long term. It's the long haul. As I say, it's the long haul. Don't trade. Don't try and be smart. Buy, hold, and bury it, and come back much later, and you'll find that it's done you proud.
Question from Matt. What should the government do to bring inflation under control ideally? And how do you rate the measures they've taken so far?
Well, they haven't taken any measures so far, is the long and short of it, which is why we have inflation galloping away. They say at about 11%. I would suggest, and you would have to look at your own family or own experience, is probably significantly more than that. And everybody has their own level of inflation. Inflation for me is different to inflation of a 20-year-old or inflation of a middle-aged man with children at school. We all have our different value rate of inflation depending on what we need and what we buy and what we earn, so on and so forth, what we spend our money on. They haven't done anything. Now, they could easily stop inflation. You need to go back to hard asset-backed money, not paper money or electronically produced money. You have to cut government spending because they print money. They create artificial money to pay for the things the government wastes their money on. So we have 1,000 quangos. We give billions of pounds to the Ukraine, which is a completely lost cause. We give £1 billion a month in overseas aid, which is largely unaudited. We have index-linked pensions for the public sector pensions, which costs us hundreds and hundreds of billions. We have high-speed rail too, which is round about 100 billion bill for that. It goes on and it goes on and it goes on. And they have made it quite clear they have no intention whatsoever of cutting public spending. Unless, of course, it's not increasing the nurses' value or so on and so forth, then they're going to tax us more. It is impossible, it is ludicrous, it is absurd to assume that you can tax your economy into success. These people are absolutely dire. So they haven't done anything. They've said they're not going to do anything. So inflation is just going to continue. How can it not continue?
Was Maggie's war on inflation a con job? It seems governments are responsible for causing inflation. See the Bank of England's inflation target for a hint.
Yes. When I was a young lad doing my economics exams, professional exams back in the 1960s, inflation was the bogeyman. Inflation was the great fear as we lived in post-war inflation in Germany and post-Great War inflation, the Weimar Republic. Inflation was the enemy of your economy. To actually then find it twisted round that the central banks had an inflation target of 2% was absolute madness. It was actually their goal. That is absolutely crazy. You couldn't invent that kind of stupidity. And of course, the other thing is once inflation's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. Yes, governments and banks create inflation. Don't imagine that central banks are independent. If the government chooses the bank governor, pays the bank governor, and can sack the bank governor, it's not independent, is it? All right? And I'm shouting now a little bit at your muppets, your financial correspondents at the BBC. Oi! If you're watching this, muppet, for goodness sake, central banks aren't independent. They're not independent. Watch my lips. They are not independent. You will always get inflation when the politicians have control of money because they turn the spigot. Your problem in America is warfare. They're addicted to war after war after war. And in this country, we are addicted to welfare and open door policies. I mean, when we continue to put immigrants coming ashore in Dover in 4-star hotels, we're going to have inflation, aren't we? Because you have to turn the spigot to actually do that. We're living in the madhouse. We are living in the madhouse. And I'm just amazed that so few people are waking up. If you're watching this clip, you're one of the people who've woken up. 80% of the population, they're still fast asleep.
Freedom Warrior wants to know, will the inflation reach a steady value soon, or do you think it will get even more severe in the next months?
I think we're going to see hyperinflation. I remember hyperinflation in the 1970s, mid-1970s, I think it was. I'm going back to many years. I remember it when the labels of the girls sitting there at the store, labelling coffee pots and tin tomatoes and stuff. You will find when you got them, you got 5 or 6 retail prices on them. They would restamp them every 2 days because the price. That's hyperinflation. We saw that in 1920s Germany. We saw it in post-war Austria, and so we've seen it more recently in Zimbabwe and places like that. Hyperinflation. Are we heading for hyperinflation? I don't see how we can't be heading for hyperinflation because nobody's actually taking it seriously. Nobody's talking about it. When was the last time we fought an election with either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party talking about the national debt, worrying about public spending? It doesn't come into the debate, doesn't come into the conversation. It doesn't come into the conversation in pubs and clubs, does it? Who talks about the national debt? Do you even know what the national debt is? Do you know, for example, it's roundabout at the moment £3 trillion, and if the equation with GDP, gross domestic product, on an annual basis, we are the same as Greece. We're broke. But it doesn't send us stopping money to Zelensky, who puts it in his pocket and and recirculates it into his property for his parents in Switzerland. Madhouse. We're in the madhouse.
From Colin now. What can we all do to avoid the credit control system that Rishi Sunak is planning on behalf of the WEF?
Well, what we're really talking about here is we always had these credit crunches. All right. What we're doing at the moment is a crisis of credit. And we are trying to solve it at the moment with more credit. It's a bit like, the mad housewife who tries to pay off her one credit card by paying it off with another credit card. And that's what we're doing at the moment. We're just borrowing and borrowing and printing and printing. So what we're going to see here is a credit crunch, which we saw in the 70s, which we saw in the late 1980s. We saw very temporarily in the 2008 crisis, which was put away by printing money. So yeah, we got a very big problem, which is the reason they want to go to a cashless society. This is what it's all about, a cashless society. So they can control exactly what you spend. You don't have any cash. They can control them. They can program the bank so that when you go with your credit card, you can only buy what they want you to buy. And they're quite upfront about this. This isn't a conspiracy theory, by the way. There's no conspiracy about this. If you look at the WEF website, you will see this is what they say, and they all belong to the WEF. They all support. They're all sponsors of the WEF. So there's not a conspiracy thing. They're saying they're going to do this. So when you want to go for your holiday and you pay with your card, which you have to do because there's no cash, they will then say, no, you've had a holiday already. You've had your entitlement to a holiday. That's it, your carbon footprint. And they'll make up some sort of excuse. Carbon footprint's the good one because people are too stupid to check it out. That's a hoax. So this is the problem we've got. So they will control the spending, they will control the credit, and we're drifting towards it. We're drifting towards it because most of the electorate's asleep. But again, as I say, if you're watching this clip, if you're watching this and you're keeping an eye on my websites, you won't fall for it. You won't fall for it. You'll come out of the system. Come out of the system. Gold is your best bet for coming out of the system in specie. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.